So thank you very much for the invite tonight, and it's always a pleasure to be performing with Randy. We've done it many times over the years, and there's been a couple of linkages between what he has said and I think what I'm going to present. But the one that I really like, he wrote it a couple of times, but not always, because "but not always" is like the signature tune for Honeycrisp. Because as Randy well stated, it doesn't behave like other apples. As I like to say, it never read the textbook, and so it never learned what it really ought to be doing as an apple. So for those of us that were brought up on real apples that behave normally, Honeycrisp is being a trial. I always used to say that Honeycrisp was a researcher's delight and a grower's nightmare. And actually, there are times I think it's a researcher's nightmare as well. So here we are. So, why is this not moving? Oh, here we go. Okay. So, Randy already alluded to the PGRS Re Tain, which is an inhibitor of ethylene biosynthesis, and Harvista, which is an inhibitor of ethylene action. Even though they have different actions in the ethylene pathway and so on, they are essentially the same responses. And the data today that I'm going to present is largely focused on a major field treatment with Harvista, but I want to make it clear that the results generally apply to both Re Tain and Harvista. I'll show you a little bit at the end of some other experiments that we've done. So a few years ago, we did a major trial with a whole series of different Harvista treatments. And I often tell my students, less is more. And I'm trying to take that same message to myself tonight. So what I've done is that in terms of the data, instead of showing you heaps of different treatments, I've just selected one, which is the 1 week before harvest, the standard late. And because it really reflects what all the treatments generally showed. So in this experiment, the fruit were treated, they were harvested, they were treated or not with post-harvest 1 MCP. They were stored with a conditioning treatment that Randy talked about, 7 days at 50 degrees at 38 Fahrenheit. We also stored fruit at 33 Fahrenheit, which we do not recommend, even though, again, as Randy said, you can get away with it sometimes, but not always. But I am going to show you a couple of data sets just to reinforce the effects of inhibiting ethylene. So as I said, it's a large data set. So I've just taken one treatment. So most of the data here are the conditioning and 38 Fahrenheit storage treatment. Just to sort of reinforce what I think we all expect to see from applying an inhibitor of ethylene. You inhibit the ethylene production, measured as internal ethylene concentration here, delay the starch a little. Again, very high starch levels compared with most apples that we are used to. And the IAD value is a measure of the greenness. So the lower the value, the less green the fruit, the less chlorophyll, and you see that there's an effect. But pretty much in terms of TA, soluble solids, firmness in this experiment, there was not much of an effect. I'm going to just jump in right now to storage disorders. Before I do that, and I know most of us don't love stats, but I do want to highlight that when you see these similar letters, that means they're not significantly different, right? So this is not significantly different from this. This is not significantly different from this. But I want to remind you that this is all about a numbers game. So if we had done this with more reps, if we'd done this with larger fruit numbers within a rep, maybe these differences would be significant. So today I can look at this and just say these are trends, but I can say that they are reinforced by many other studies that we've done. So typically, Harvista treated fruit and Re Tain treated fruit have higher bitter pit percentages, which is exactly what you would expect from a disorder that is associated with early harvest. Okay, so is very much consistent, but we have to keep that in mind. And I think this has very important consequences that I will come back to at the end in terms of recommendations. If you are a grower that has a high risk orchard with bitter pit, the take-home message that I will share later, so I'm coming it to you now as well, is that you are probably pretty foolish putting plant growth regulators on a block where you know right now that you have a high bitter pit risk. Leather blotch. And I am so annoyed. I had on the corner of all these photos, I had horrible, on the corner of all of these slides, I had horrible photos because I knew I was going to have to match Randy, but unfortunately I don't. And he didn't show leather blotch. Leather blotch is one of our more interesting disorders. We actually came up with the name as a group, leather blotch. But the take-home message here is very little effect of plant growth regulators, but a very big effect on leather blotch incidence if you apply 1 MCP post-harvest, and especially if that fruit has already been treated with Harvista. So again, it points to a maturity type relationship. And in fact, there's my photo coming in now. I didn't realize I was so clever. So Lee, who's on this call, has published some work sort of indicating that leather blotch is in some ways closely related to bitter pit. Interestingly, we don't always find that relationship. But so my season this year, Lee, is to prove you wrong. If I can find an alternative explanation, but I'm not sure I will be able to. But anyway, it's something we have to be very careful about. Core browning. This is an internal disorder, as you can see here in the right-hand top corner. The browning of the core significantly enhanced by 1 MCP that is not affected by plant growth regulators. However, this does not always happen. And that, as Randy said, but not always. Doesn't always happen, but it can happen. And it certainly does happen, as I will show you in a little bit, if you store the fruit at 33 Fahrenheit. Senescent breakdown, again, less breakdown with Harvista than with in control, and slightly less typically with 1 MCP than without 1 MCP. Again, coming back to Randy's presentation, which we did not rehearse, by the way, so this is all random. Randy talked about senescent breakdown being a maturity, over maturity, or advanced maturity type disorder. And again, this data reinforces that. Wrinkly skin. There's another little pleasure of Honeycrisp. I don't know whether you see this in Washington. We sure see it in New York. But it's a very frustrating disorder because it happens very irregularly. It doesn't happen commonly, and we really don't have a handle on what is causing it, other than you would assume it's associated with water loss in some way. But you can see a pretty clear effect of our Harvista in terms of reducing the amount. So that does suggest that there's a maturity-related disorder as well. A few effects of storage at 33, which I promised you I would show you, but really want to reinforce this is not a recommended temperature for Honeycrisp at any time. We still have people that are finding that out for themselves, and I've had storage operators tell me that they don't need to worry about it, and then they have that unfortunate year when they wish maybe they had been a little bit safer. But what I didn't show you at 38 was everything was greasy. Conditioning is obviously holding fruit for 7 days at 50 is going to enhance greasiness, and then a warm storage temperature on top of that. In this experiment, you can see we did not condition. The fruit was stored directly at 33. And there you see very strong effects of Harvista and of 1 MCP on reducing the amount of greasiness. Core browning, look at these levels. We're talking about 60, almost 60%, 55% in the control with 1 MCP compared with almost nothing without 1 MCP. And in Harvista treated fruit, almost 80 compared with maybe about 8%. So pretty convincing data set in terms of the effect of low temperature. And then in terms of soft scald, which we typically don't see in fruit that have been conditioned and stored at 38, we see the very marked reduction of fruit that has been treated with soft scald. Randy alluded to the work of Jennifer DL, who showed this some years ago in Ontario. We find this repeatedly, that Harvista treated fruit will have a much lower incidence of soft scald, even when they're stored at 33 Fahrenheit. So I promised you some comparative data just to finish off between Harvista and Re Tain. And this is a trial from a few years ago from Western New York fruit. We actually carried out this trial in the Champlain, Western New York and Hudson Valley, but Harvista was applied 1 week before harvest, Re Tain a half rate 2 weeks before harvest. The fruit were conditioned, stored in 3% oxygen, 3% CO2 at 38 for 6 months. And essentially the take-home message is that these two compounds react very similarly. This is results that we've found with Empire, with Macintosh. Any fruit that is susceptible to CO2 injury, you're going to enhance your risk of injury by treating the fruit in the field with either Harvista or Re Tain. So all the methods that Randy talked about, delayed CA of 30 days, low CO2 percentages in the atmosphere, all hold true. What worries me if we ever lose DPA, which is what most New York storage operators are using routinely to control the disorder. Somebody, if they're around, if we ever do lose DPA, everybody's got to be reminded that if we stop using DPA, unless we adapt very quickly to other methodologies, management techniques, we're going to have a disaster in our storages. And then core browning, again, take-home message is Harvista and Re Tain pretty similar in terms of the enhancement of core browning by inhibiting ethylene production in the field before harvest. So take-home messages for Honeycrisp. And I don't ignore that bit of it on the end. Just focus on the text. So as storage lengths increase, which is happening as the volumes of Honeycrisp are increasing, we have to consider what those effects are in terms of PGRs and post-harvest 1 MCP. Because sometimes they may not be very important if you are selling that fruit within a relatively short time frame. But the longer that fruit is in storage, the greater the risk. I strongly recommend that growers do not use PGRs on high bitter pit risk blocks. You are going to increase the amount of bitter pit that you already have over and above what you have. So for those, we recommend cooling the fruit. I hate it when I hear people say market the fruit immediately, because all you're doing is putting fruit with bitter pit susceptibility into the marketplace. I think that fruit should be cooled, the pit allowed to develop, and then that fruit is marketed after it's been graded. Leather blotch, this relatively new disorder, is a significant concern as post-harvest MCP does increase the susceptibility in fruit that have been treated with PGRs. And then core browning is a significant concern as 1 MCP increases susceptibility regardless of PGR use in longer term storage. So just to wrap up, I just want to acknowledge the funders, people that have been involved in supporting this program with the New York Apple R&D program, a Hatch multi-state project that Carolina and Randy and I are part of, Valent Biosciences and Refreshed, and then Joseph L. Shoffey in my lab and Jackie Knock, who has retired, and then the many participating growers. So thank you very much for your time, and I guess we will open up for questions if that is the plan.